You know what they never tell you? That the more clearly you start seeing people, the more alone you'll feel. Not because you're unlovable, not because something is wrong with you, but because clarity doesn't just reveal the truth. It strips away every comforting illusion you used to hold on to. And the most painful part, you didn't ask for it. You didn't go looking for some grand awakening. It just happened. Maybe it starts with something small, a comment that feels off, a friend's laugh that sounds rehearsed. Maybe you notice someone mirroring your opinions too perfectly, until they're with someone else and they become a completely different person. It doesn't feel like betrayal. Not yet, just strange. You shake it off. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You want to believe the best in people because believing the worst feels heavy. It feels lonely, but then it keeps happening. Little things, inconsistencies, moments when someone's smile doesn't quite reach their eyes. Times when they say, "I'm here for you," but disappear the second you need them. The way a compliment turns into a comparison. The way support comes with strings. And then, without meaning to, you start noticing patterns. How often people fish for praise under the guise of self-deprecation. How they weaponize vulnerability, not to connect, but to control. How they claim to just want the best for you, but only if it doesn't threaten their comfort. You start hearing the subtext. You start feeling the weight beneath their words. You see the masks, the personas they wear to gain affection, to avoid conflict, to secure control. And slowly, painfully, you realize this is how most people operate. They're not being malicious. They're being safe, conditioned, shaped by a world that rewards performance over presence, charisma over character. And here you are, finally seeing it. That's the curse of clarity. It doesn't shout. It whispers. And once it starts whispering, you can't unhear it. You can't laugh the same way at small talk. You can't nod along with things you no longer believe. You can't fake interest when every word feels like theater. At first, you try to hold on. You play along. You tell yourself you're being unfair, too sensitive, too cynical. But clarity isn't cynicism. It's seeing clearly and hurting because of it. Because the moment you stop pretending, people start pulling away. Not because they hate you, but because your honesty disrupts the show. Your presence becomes a mirror, and most people aren't ready to see themselves. And so, you drift. Not out of bitterness, but necessity. You didn't choose solitude. Solitude chose you the moment clarity arrived. And from that moment on, you could never go back. Solitude didn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It came like a slow fog, creeping in after everyone you thought you knew slowly faded into silhouettes. At first, you tried to deny it. You clung to old conversations, old photos, old laughter like they were proof. Proof that what you were seeing now couldn't be real. That people couldn't be that shallow, that selfish, that calculated. You told yourself they were just busy, just tired, just going through something, but deep down you knew. You saw the shift in their eyes when you stopped feeding the script. When you stopped saying the expected thing. When you didn't react with validation, or flattery, or comfort. They pulled away, but not all at once. No, it was slower than that. A message left unanswered. A plan cancelled without rescheduling. A smile that didn't touch their eyes anymore. You started realizing how fragile most connections really are. How much they depend on you being someone they need, not someone you are. And the more real you became, the less room there was for you in their world. Because realness is disruptive. When you see through the mask, you stop clapping for the performance. When you stop clapping, they call you negative. When you tell the truth, they call you cold. And you start to see what connection really meant to them. A mirror, a puppet, a stage, not a person. So you begin to retreat, not because you hate people, but because your peace can't survive in a place where you have to shrink to be loved. You become more selective. You stop replying out of obligation. You start choosing silence over small talk. It's not bitterness. It's preservation, because the more clearly you see, the more exhausting it becomes to stay close to those who are still pretending. You watch them smile and lie. You hear the desperation in their bragging. You see the insecurity behind their arrogance. And it doesn't make you angry, it makes you tired. Tired of pretending you don't see it. Tired of playing a role just to feel accepted. So you choose quiet. Not because it's easier, but because it's honest. In the silence, you find yourself. And in finding yourself, you lose what was never real. That's the paradox. Clarity doesn't just show you who they are. It shows you who you were. Someone willing to play along, just to feel less alone. But now, you'd rather be alone than fake. Rather be misunderstood than controlled. Rather be distant than drained. Because once the masks begin to fall, there's no more comfort in the crowd, only truth and the space it creates. Once the masks fall, a strange thing happens. You start noticing the patterns, not just in individuals, but everywhere. Conversations, relationships, family gatherings, even casual encounters in elevators and grocery stores. You begin to see the invisible choreography everyone's dancing to. And suddenly, you're not moving to the same rhythm anymore. You hear someone laughing, a little too loudly, and you know they're not amused. You see someone compliment a friend, and behind the smile, there's envy. You witness kindness being used as currency, favors handed out like bait. It's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. You see how often "Are you okay?" isn't concern, it's prelude to a request. You notice how the loudest people in the room are the most afraid of silence. How those who constantly perform confidence are quietly begging for approval. You've seen behind the curtain, and once you've seen it, it's everywhere. You no longer hear what people are saying. You hear why they're saying it. You see the angle, the strategy, the subtle power exchange buried in the subtext of every word. What used to be a simple interaction now feels like emotional chess. The co-worker who drops compliments just loud enough for others to hear. The friend who always has time when your life is falling apart, but disappears the moment you're doing well. The family member who disguises guilt as concern, making your boundaries feel like betrayal. You remember how things used to feel, effortless, light, human. Now, everything feels managed, curated, strategic, and it makes you wonder, was it always like this, and you were just too blind to see? Or did the world change while you were waking up? Either way, there's no comfort in the answer, because once you can predict the next line of a conversation, once you know how someone will react before they even open their mouth, it stops feeling like connection. It starts feeling like programming. You don't want to be a mind reader. You just wanted truth. But truth doesn't always bring peace. Sometimes it brings distance. Sometimes it brings silence. And sometimes it brings the deepest loneliness you've ever felt, not from the absence of people, but from the absence of authenticity, surrounded, yet completely alone. And the worst part, you can't explain it to anyone, because the moment you try, they think you're being negative. judgmental, closed off. But it's not that. It's just, you see it all now, and once you see the performance, you can't go back to pretending it's real. This is the part no one prepares you for. The kind of loneliness that doesn't come from isolation, but from exposure, from seeing too much, from understanding too deeply, from being awake in a world where everyone else is still sleepwalking. It's not that you're physically alone. You still go to gatherings. You still pick up the phone. You still make conversation. But something has changed. You can't unsee the distance between what people say and what they mean. You can't unfeel the hollowness in their smiles. You can't unhear the performance in their voices. You start noticing that most conversations aren't about connection, they're about control. Control of perception, emotion, attention. You say something vulnerable, and they laugh awkwardly or pivot the topic. You express an honest opinion, and they look at you like you've committed a social crime. You bring your real self to the table, and they subtly start pushing their chairs away, and that's when it hits you. It's not that people don't want connection. They do, desperately. But they only want the version of connection that doesn't require discomfort, depth, or honesty. They want pleasant lies over inconvenient truths. They want shallow validation over meaningful challenge. They want emotional sugar, not the bitter medicine of real understanding. And so you become too much, too serious, too intense, too awake. They say, you've changed. And they're right, you have. Because the old you, the one who nodded along, who laughed on cue, who played your role without question, that person had to die the moment you chose clarity. And now, you're left in the in-between, too aware to go back, too rare to be fully understood. You scroll through social media, and every post feels like theater. Every highlight reel you see is a mask someone glued on for applause. You listen to conversations, and they sound like scripts. Same jokes, same gossip, same meaningless banter wrapped in forced laughter. You're not judging. You're grieving because you remember a time when you didn't see all this, when ignorance was bliss, when connection felt simple, even if it wasn't real. But that simplicity is gone now, and in its place is a heavy kind of quiet, a quiet that isn't empty, it's full, full of truth, full of clarity, full of solitude that doesn't hurt, unless you try to explain it. Because how do you explain to someone that your loneliness isn't about missing people? It's about missing connection. Real connection. Rare connection. The kind that doesn't flinch when you stop pretending. Eventually, clarity forces you to draw lines. Not out of bitterness, not out of arrogance, but out of survival. You realize you've been leaking energy into people who only know how to take. So you begin to reclaim it. Not dramatically. Quietly, you stop answering messages out of guilt. You stop saying yes when your whole body screams no. You start making space for people who never made space for you. And suddenly, you're a villain. The moment you start setting boundaries, the people who benefited from your lack of them begin to squirm. They say you've become cold, distant, selfish. But they're not mad because you changed. They're mad because you stopped being so easy to access, so easy to use. You learn that no is a complete sentence, but few people hear it that way. To them, your refusal is rejection. Your self-respect is disrespect. Your silence is punishment. They accuse you of being difficult, but they never saw how easy you made everything before. Easy to manipulate. Easy to interrupt. Easy to drain now. They have to meet you where you really are, and they don't know how, because the real you doesn't perform. The real you doesn't play therapist, fixer, peacekeeper, or emotional sponge. The real you is calm, clear, and no longer available for people who confuse access with entitlement. You start speaking a language most people don't understand: directness without apology, distance without drama, presence without performance, and in a world that thrives on people-pleasing, that kind of clarity feels aggressive, but it isn't. It's sacred. You start to see how often you bent your own values in the name of being liked. How often you tolerated things that bruised your spirit just to avoid conflict or now. You don't avoid it, but you don't chase it either. You simply stand, firm, unmoving. You used to think setting boundaries would make you more respected. Instead, it made you more alone. But this time, the aloneness doesn't feel like a void. It feels like a filter. The wrong people fall away. The right ones pause, respect the space, and ask if they're welcome in it. And you realize boundaries don't push people away. They reveal who's willing to meet you in your truth, and who only came for the performance, in a world that demands your compliance to feel loved. Choosing self-respect will often make you misunderstood, but that's okay, because being misunderstood in your truth is still better than being loved for your mask. When the noise of others fades, a different kind of sound emerges. At first, it's unsettling, the silence. No constant pings, no emotional emergencies, no guilt-laced requests for your time. Just stillness. It feels unnatural, like you've forgotten something. Like there's a space you're supposed to fill. But slowly, that stillness reveals something far more profound. Wholeness. You begin to realize how long you mistook noise for connection. How often you confused attention for care. How deeply you relied on distraction to avoid facing your own emptiness. Now, there's no one to perform for. No expectations to outrun. No masks to wear. And what you find isn't loneliness. It's yourself, unfiltered, uninterrupted, undeniable. You begin to remember the things you love, not the things you said you loved to fit in. Books you never finished. Questions you never asked. Parts of yourself you buried under the weight of being likable. You start to feel the difference between being drained and being alone. And you wonder why you feared this so much. Why you thought solitude was punishment when it was always the medicine. Because peace, real peace, isn't found in people who only love you when you're useful. It's found in the quiet certainty that you don't have to earn your right to exist. And when you start living from that place, your energy changes. You stop chasing closure. You stop seeking validation. You stop apologizing for choosing yourself. The world doesn't celebrate this kind of healing. It celebrates visibility, applause, activity, even if it costs your soul. But you've tasted something different now, something deeper. You walk slower, think clearer, speak less, not because you're afraid, but because you no longer feel the need to prove anything. You realize that connection is not about constant presence. It's about resonance, and very few people can meet you in the kind of stillness that clarity creates. You're no longer looking for the next person to fill your time. You're not looking to be saved. You're not trying to save anyone either, because the strongest kind of love, the kind that doesn't drain you, begins with self. And the most powerful form of connection comes after you've made peace with being alone. They told you solitude was empty, but you learned the truth. It's not empty, it's pure, and for the first time in your life, you're not afraid of it. You're grateful for it. When you stop chasing people, something else starts chasing you. Clarity, strength, and growth. Not the kind of growth that screams for attention. Not the kind you post online or wrap in clever captions. This kind of growth is quiet. So quiet that most people won't even notice it. But you do. You feel it in the way. You no longer tolerate what once drained you. You notice it when your triggers lose their power, when your reactions become responses, when someone tries to bait you into drama, and you feel nothing. That's growth. You used to explain yourself to people who never intended to understand you. Now you simply step back. You used to try to fix relationships that were built on illusions. Now you let them collapse. And the people who once misunderstood your silence as weakness, they start to notice. Not because you proved anything to them, but because you stopped giving them access to the version of you that needed to. You're no longer fueled by resentment. You're not seeking revenge, but your growth is the consequence, your peace. The one they didn't think you'd find without them becomes the loudest thing about you. They try to reach back out, some with guilt, some with nostalgia, some with manipulation disguised as apology. But something has shifted. You don't feel the pull anymore. You don't feel the need to re-explain your worth. You don't feel the urgency to be seen, heard, or accepted, because now you see yourself. You hear yourself. You accept yourself. And that makes you untouchable. Growth, you realize, isn't about becoming someone else. It's about returning to who you were before the world taught you to perform. It's about unlearning the survival strategies that kept you small. It's about rebuilding yourself on a foundation of truth, not approval. And when you operate from that place, you don't need to prove your growth. You live it. The ones who took you for granted will notice. The ones who underestimated your silence will hear it louder than your words. But by then, you'll be too far gone, not in distance, but in elevation. Because when you heal in solitude, the people who wounded you can no longer reach where you've risen. You didn't grow to make a point. You grew because you had to. And now, the life you're building, quiet, clear, grounded, is the kind of life no validation can give and no betrayal can take away. That's the quiet revenge. The one that doesn't shout. The one that simply moves on. Eventually, you stop needing the noise, the applause, the validation, the illusion of belonging. You stopped trying to re-enter rooms you outgrew just to prove you were never the problem. You stopped trying to correct the stories people tell about you. Because truth doesn't need defending. When you've made peace with it, you no longer measure your worth by who stays or who claps. You measure it by how aligned you feel in your own company. And for the first time, solitude isn't a sentence, it's a sanctuary. You don't isolate because you're angry. You isolate because you're awake. You see how easily people trade depth for convenience. How easily they mistake proximity for connection. How often they demand your emotional labor, but won't carry their own. And so, you say the most revolutionary word in a world addicted to more. Enough. Enough pretending. Enough performing. Enough pouring from a cup that no one ever thought to refill. You stop chasing what depletes you. You stop explaining your peace to people committed to chaos. You stop trying to be understood by those addicted to misunderstanding you. And in that stillness, in that space between who you were and who you're becoming, you find something rare. You find yourself not the version shaped by other people's comfort. Not the one molded by applause or fear. The real you. The one that never needed permission to exist. And once you meet that version of yourself, you'll never abandon them again to be loved by others. You'll never trade peace for approval. You'll never shrink to fit someone else's expectations. You'll never dilute your clarity just to belong in places built on confusion, because clarity may be a curse, but it's also your compass. It shows you who's real. It reveals what's worth your time. It separates performance from presence and noise from truth. And yes, it leaves you alone sometimes, but never lonely, because once you begin to build a life rooted in self-respect, authenticity, and inner alignment, the people who belong in it won't demand you to abandon those things to let them in. They'll meet you there. Until then, let the quiet guide you. Let your solitude sharpen you, and let your clarity protect what you fought so hard to build. If this spoke to you, if you've ever felt like the more you see, the more alone you become, you're not broken. You're becoming free. Subscribe for more stories that cut through the noise and remind you of your truth. And in the comments, tell me this. What was your breaking point, the moment you finally said, enough? Your story might help someone else find their own. Until next time, stay awake, stay real, and most importantly, stay free.